Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 91 of the In a Nutshell podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vowells. Joe Meade is with me today. And Joe, we have got just two games that happened since the last time that we talked, but we've had a little bit of a change in bracketology. And we are just two games into the Big Ten tournament, but perhaps the biggest storyline has already happened. It's a game that went final just minutes before we clicked record, and it was Ohio State losing to Iowa, bringing the Buckeyes down to 17-15. Joe, they entered the game as our last team in the field, and falling to just two games over 500, a team like that has never been included as an at-large. So, big difference in situation for the Buckeyes.
Yeah, Sean, kind of a disastrous second half. The first half was a typical Iowa basketball game where you're going to be tied probably into a bit of a firefight. And to be honest with you, I thought the game was going to be in the 40s at half. It was tied at 37. Then you get into the second half. From the 14-minute mark on, Iowa just dominated. Even when Ohio State took the lead back briefly, Iowa would respond back with two straight possessions with a score. And Ohio State, two separate stretches, I believe, 3+ minutes where they wouldn't score or they didn't score. So the absolute worst case scenario for Ohio State, who I thought after their Nebraska win wasn't necessarily in the greatest position, but I thought they were in pretty good position. I said, hey, at Indiana, that's a game that was competitive the first time. And then worst comes to worst, you play on Wednesday in the Big Ten tournament. All you have to do is probably win one game and you're at least in Dayton. They failed to do either of those tasks, Sean. So I think the way Jake Diebler's first full season as the Buckeye head coach is going to be highly skewed based on this. I think it's more fair we'll do a judgment after the year, taking everything into account. But as of right now, I'm pretty sure Buckeye Nation is on fire right now. So very bad for Ohio State, but probably better news for some other Big Ten bubble teams, particularly one Big Ten bubble team, and that's your Indiana Hoosiers. Is that right, Sean?
Yes, but I just want to talk about the game for a little bit more, Joe. Iowa has been... You just have to make shots against them. You usually do get good looks. Ohio State goes 42% and 5 for 22 from three. It's hard to win a game like that, and Iowa always scores it well. They're playing a little bit better ball, and they're going to move on to play Illinois tomorrow instead of Ohio State. And Joe, Indiana, it does change the situation for Indiana a little bit. Because let's assume Ohio State's out of the field. That's two less wins against the field for the Hoosiers. Not exactly sure what effect that will have. They still stay Q1, Q2. But we talked about this before we clicked record. I didn't think that Ohio State could catch Indiana as an at-large. I don't think the at-larges can catch the Hoosiers, who are my fourth to last team in right now. It's just going to come down to the bid stealers because the grouping ahead, really only one of the teams lost today, and that was or two of them. West Virginia did lose to Colorado. That brings them back into the mix with the Oklahomas and the Arkansas, and then Vanderbilt lost to Texas, giving them some life, and North Carolina also beat Notre Dame, which gives them a chance at Wake Forest tomorrow. So we are assuming that somebody does drop out or somebody does step in for Ohio State. And with Arkansas winning, with West Virginia and Vanderbilt losing, maybe they get pulled back into it. But we're going to have to see how the numbers shake out tomorrow. I do have the numbers from yesterday with these bubble teams up, and I'll put it up for the viewers now. Joe, I really think there's 5 teams for one spot, and you can really now make that 4 with Ohio State stepping out. Very similar numbers to North Carolina across the both the resume and the quality metrics. But see here, Ohio State had 3 Quad 1A wins to just 1, and 6 total Quad 1s to just 1. And then they did take a 4th Q2 loss today. So we do know how that will affect things. They'll drop to 9-15 in quads 1 and 2. And at this point, Ohio State is probably headed towards the crown. And then bracketology-wise, Texas gets a shot at Texas A&M tomorrow. Boise State still has to play in the Mountain West Tournament. But it's pretty clear that that spot is open for the taking right now. We don't know exactly what the committee's feeling, but committees of the past would eliminate Ohio State based on what happened today.
Yeah, Sean, is there any chance they get it, you think?
I don't know. It's never happened before. So for them to do that, they would basically have to throw 20 plus years of precedent away. 15 losses, only one at-large team has ever made it with 15 losses, and that was Michigan back in 2021. They
No, that
had
was 17 and 14, by the way,
17 and
Sean.
14. Sorry, the only team with 17 wins. Forget the losses for now. The only team with 17 wins to make it was that Michigan team. They did have 6 quad one wins, I believe, and much better metrics. So I don't think it's in the cards for Ohio State. In terms of Indiana, the Oregon game tomorrow will be interesting. It might serve as a avoid Dayton game because with Vanderbilt and West Virginia falling, it looks like Baylor is going to win against Kansas State right now, but Indiana could certainly catch one of those two teams that lost with a quad one win tomorrow. And perhaps one of those teams gets dragged in to the first four. San Diego State still has to play in the Mountain West, but in terms of Indiana, it is a pretty fluid situation right now, Joe. Bid Steelers aside, I think they're in a good spot not to be overtaken by any of the teams below them.
Yeah.
All right, we did have another game today. The first game, it was Northwestern over Minnesota like we predicted. And, Joe, it was one that might have gone under the radar sort of with the both teams basically have to win this thing to go to the tournament. But Nick Martinelli showed out with 28 points, 7 rebounds, played every single second of this game. And Dawson Garcia scores 22 in his last game for Minnesota, unless they go to the postseason. But we thought Northwestern was the better team. They were slight favorites, and they got the job done.
Yeah, Sean, I think what it came down to, and I think we both picked Northwestern based on our last recap, was Northwestern had Nick Martinelli, and he has some support staff. I think Minnesota's played some decent ball all year. I think overall, Mike Mitchell Jr. has been a solid Robin to Dawson Garcia for what they are. But at the end of the day, they're still not a great basketball team. I commend them for making the Big Ten tournament. That's not said as a slight. There were times this year, especially in early December and early January, thought this was a team that was almost guaranteed to be in the Washington position, like eliminated with a week or two to go. And they did anything but that. They picked up some big wins. They beat Michigan this year. They beat Oregon this year. And they also was the puzzling road game they had. And they won at UCLA. So I don't know like what ultimately the progress is for Ben Johnson. It's been, I believe this is his 4th year in charge of the program now. Probably pretty good last year. This year, a bit of a step down. Big picture wise, I think that's a question. Let's face it, Sean. Minnesota basketball is one of the most puzzling enigmas in the sport. You had Richard Pitino there, who, as shown, is a pretty good coach, and they fired him after a few lackluster seasons. So, who really knows? But that's a conversation for another time.
Yeah, I think I'd be shocked if they move on from Ben Johnson. This was like one of the better outcomes of the season, I think, to get 7 wins in the Big Ten. I mean, you're not that far away from good enough to get in an at-large. So I think they'll stick with him. Revenue sharing does start next year, which should help them. They did lose a couple of players in the transfer portal after last season, but it was a little bit of a tough draw for Minnesota, and I think they exceeded expectations this year because they were pretty low. All right, for tomorrow's games, Joe, we did preview Indiana, Oregon in our last one, but let's end it here with the preview of the matchups that we now know. Wisconsin and Northwestern, with how short Northwestern's bench is with their injuries and playing on an extra day, Wisconsin resting today, you'd have to think that the odds are stacked against the Wildcats here, and you'd be surprised with anything other than a pretty convincing Badgers win.
I would say that, Sean, but Wisconsin, it's really hard to unsee their game on Saturday. Frankly, we've seen a theme. This happened to my team, it happened to Michigan, and it happened to the only team it hasn't happened to quite yet, Sean, is Maryland. Teams kind of fall apart the few games after they play Michigan State. Wisconsin, I don't think they played their best game at the barn. They and a credit to them, they gutted out a victory there. They go on to lose to a team already eliminated for the Big Ten tournament in Penn State. And this is kind of the first real game we're seeing since that layoff. So I am going to pick Wisconsin in this game, Sean. Ultimately, I think the combo of Taji, Blackwell, and most likely a Klesmit or Crow or Nolan Winter is going to be enough. But I pick it very non-confidently, which should not be the case for a team that's in the top 20, that's the number 5 seed in the conference, and who, for the most part, excluding the last weeks, played really good basketball since January.
They have played once this year. Joe, was a 75-69 victory for Wisconsin at Welsh Ryan. Tanji had 27. Carter Gilmore 15 off the bench. Martinelli was 6 for 18 from the field. Jalen Leach did have a great game in that one with 23, 7, and 7. He will obviously not play tomorrow with his injury. But, I mean, Martinelli had a pretty bad game last time around, and they still had a chance at the end. So, again, I don't want to... I'd be shocked if this was a total blowout. I think it could be one that's pretty close early on. Maybe Wisconsin's a little rusty, but then I think Wisconsin will just kind of win it by like 12 or 13 in the end. All right, the third game tomorrow that we have is Iowa against Illinois. Iowa playing for their NCAA tournament hopes. They may be in the NIT or the Crown. I'm not entirely sure how that works yet, but Illinois is playing really well, Joe, and it would be quite surprising to see Iowa move on again, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and this is another thing. It's not as heavy a caveat as the last game we just previewed. Iowa, you got to tip your cap though, Sean. They've played 2 effectively elimination games that they were not favored in. Nebraska, they were definitely not favored in at Pinnacle Bank, and then today they were 6-point dogs going into the game against Ohio State. 2 teams that, as of a week ago, were pretty much in the NCAA tournament. So I think Illinois, though, is a different monster. I think Iowa is completely capable of playing a good game. I think after seeing their performance against Michigan State, to the Nebraska game, to the game today against Ohio State, it's really hard to critique anything about their end of season effort, but I think they do run out of gas. I think Illinois is really hot right now. Perhaps you could argue the 4-day layoff, the 6-day layoff from Friday night could be a factor. Perhaps, but also Brad Underwood's done really well in this Big Ten tournament of late, and it's really hard to ignore that. I think he'll have his team ready, and I really do think Illinois is one of the more dangerous teams in the country as of right now.
And in the first matchup of the year, it was in Champaign. It wasn't very long ago, actually, just February 25th, so a couple weeks ago. It was that game that got the Illini out of the rut that they were in, an 81-61 victory for Illinois. Visich with 22, Boswell and Riley with 15. No Merez Johnson in that game. He is expected to be back for Illinois. And Iowa did actually struggle from the field in this one, Joe. Only 42% from the field, 6 for 18 from 3. So potentially, if they got to see a couple shots go down early, because you do know it will be tough later. But I don't know. I feel like Illinois at its best kind of plays the style that Iowa does, and maybe we could see a surprise there. I think it's more likely Iowa wins than Northwestern.
Really? I disagree there.
I just
Okay,
Iowa,
interesting.
the volatility of the Hawkeyes is a little bit higher, I think, and I'm not sure that Northwestern can win sort of like over 40 minutes, but it would be cool to see them do it also. Game 4 tomorrow will be Purdue against the winner of Rutgers and USC. That has just gotten underway as we're recording. But Joe, if Rutgers wins, if USC wins, Purdue should be favored either way.
Yeah, I think they will absolutely be favored, and I'm saying this without knowing the result of this game, so this has the chance to be extremely foolish. I do believe whoever wins between USC and Rutgers, I'm assuming it's going to be Rutgers, uh, can challenge Purdue. A lot of people have labeled Michigan or perhaps even a Wisconsin as teams pretty cold right now. I think Purdue's really cold. I don't think they've played anywhere near their best basketball. I understand that, losing at Illinois is not that bad. You look at an individual case-by-case basis. They blew out Rutgers, but then, they had a 4-game losing streak, which was started off by losing that close game at Chrysler, and then it kind of just compounded from there. Albeit they lost to 4 NCAA tournament teams, so I don't want to hold that against them too much. I do think it's something to consider. I think their bench is going to be the key factor in this entire Big Ten tournament should they get past their game tomorrow. And that's going to be a theme we see. If it's reliant on that, I don't think a Big Ten tournament title is in the cards this year for Purdue, to be quite honest with you.
Yeah, with Purdue, it is in Indiana, so it is likely to be a very pro Boilermaker crowd. West Lafayette, it is a little further away from Indy than Bloomington, but still, they'll be very much the home team there. They just need all of, they just need their big three players to play really well to get to where they want to as a team. And now that might be good enough to get past Thursday's opponent, and it might be good enough to get past Michigan too, honestly, but I think Purdue and their fans know that their ceiling, maybe their ceiling isn't lower, but their floor certainly is. And with that said, like maybe this is the year they go on a Big Ten tournament run because they know that their prospects in the NCAA tournament aren't all that great. But this bottom part of the bracket, today's game, tomorrow's game, and then Friday's game are the most intriguing to me because I could really see any of those four teams making it to the semifinals with how up and down Purdue and Michigan have been. But, Joe, we're going to wrap this one up. Actually, not yet. We had some movement for the higher teams in the Big Ten on bracketology. We had Oregon coming up to the 4 line to take the spot of Clemson. And that means all the 4 seeds are in the Big Ten, Joe, which does make things a little bit interesting in the fact that Michigan and UCLA on the 5 line could have a round of 32 matchup with a team in the Big Ten. Now, I believe we talked about this last time, but I think it's very likely that Michigan gets put in Wisconsin's region because of they only played once. They did play Purdue twice. That cannot happen. And I don't believe you played the other 2 teams twice either, but yeah. I think Oregon and Maryland also very likely to move off the 4 line. UCLA with Purdue also, they just played once. But a logjam of Big Ten teams there in the middle of the favored teams. Not much moving for Illinois or Indiana. We expect Ohio State to drop off. We've got Michigan State up there at the 2 in the South region. Don't expect that to change either. But that is something to look out for in those teams on the 4-5 line. Perhaps they go on a run, they get themselves up another spot.
Yeah, Sean, just a few quick questions for you, because we're going to try to wrap this up pretty soon. Between Michigan and UCLA, which team do you think is in the most danger of falling off the 5 line?
Okay, so let's go take a look at the team sheet. We can compare the 2 resumes right now. Okay, so we have got Michigan here at 17 across the resume metrics and 30 across the quality, 25 and 24 for UCLA. The same amount of Quad 1A wins, the same amount of Quad 1 wins. Michigan has 2 Quad 2 losses. UCLA has 1 Quad 2, 1 Quad 3. Joe, these are extremely close. I believe I put Michigan 1 spot ahead when I did this earlier. Michigan is 19, UCLA is 20. So at this point, I think it's very close, and it might have to do with who does better in the Big Ten tournament. That would not be the answer to your question. But these resumes are extremely similar. Michigan has the slight edge right now, but if UCLA can beat a Wisconsin and Michigan falls to Purdue, maybe that flips it. But I think both of them are pretty safe on the 5 line, actually.
Because why wouldn't a Louisville, a St. Mary's, or a BYU jump them? Unless they went to a deep tournament run.
Yeah, I don't think Louisville can. St. Mary's is done. They've already played their conference tournament. Illinois, they're already like really up high. Like they've skyrocketed up the seed list. And then BYU they're the 4 seed in the Big 12 tournament. They could potentially play Houston in the semis. But yeah, I think there's a significant like you see BYU 2 Quad 1A wins, Michigan with 4, 9 total Quad 1 for Michigan, 6 total Quad 1 for BYU. I don't think that's particularly close. Illinois is at 4 and 8 versus 4 and 9. I mean, maybe Illinois could get them, but by that point, the committee might already have the seeds. So I think there's a pretty distinct cutoff after UCLA, actually.
Very good. One last question. Should an Iowa or Northwestern, probably not Northwestern with their record, but should an Iowa win two more games, beating Illinois and Maryland, do you think that gets them anywhere close to the bubble or no?
I don't think so. I haven't done their numbers in a while, so we can pull them up here. Yeah, no, they're 72nd and 65th. Just 1 in 14 in quad one with a quad three loss. No, they would have to get the automatic bid.
Very good. All right, Sean. Unless you had anything else, I think we could table the rest of this for tomorrow when we preview Friday.
Yep. So thank you everybody for tuning in. We're gonna try and do like a midday one tomorrow, like we did today. It's the last game ends too late for us to do it then, because we have to wake up in the morning. But thank you everybody for tuning into this quick one, and we'll hopefully see you tomorrow around the same time.